Welcome to Wings Australia YouTube channel. My name is Pete Ring. My background is Australian Air Force pilot specialising in fighters and choppers. These chats are sponsored by Wings Magazine and by Ad Astra Foundation. Our aim is to record and promote Australian Defence Force veteran experiences. Now, this morning, we're talking with Air Vice Marshal Elliot McLeod, Mac. Mac is his nice, well-known name. Elliot McLeod, Mac, well, I am retired. Mac had an extensive and varied engineering career in the Australian Air Force, which carried him from apprenticeship as an armament fitter in 1958 to 40 years later in 1996 being appointed Air Officer commanding RAAF Logistics Command in command of 3,500 people and a budget of $8 billion for ADF aviation support. In the middle of his career, Mac was appointed Senior Engineering Officer of 9 Squadron RAAF, Bung Tower, responsible for all engineering and maintenance of the helicopter squadron left of service in Vietnam. I want to talk to Mac today about this era. Welcome, Mac. Good morning.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Good. Thanks for joining us. I just outline what you the environment you're in. There were 16 Hueys deployed to Vietnam. The daily online requirement was 9 slick Hueys and 3 gunships. It was a very challenging annual rate of effort of 14,000 hours, meant that each tail number accrued 1,000 hours in a year and set a punishing schedule of regular scheduled maintenance. 12 online every day. Generally speaking, what did it take to keep up with the demand?
It took a magnificent group of people to do that. And that's probably the most important thing I would say about my experience there was just the superb quality of the tradespeople that I had under me. They were outstanding. And it really reflected on the skills and the training base of the Air Force at large. I mean, Squadron at this stage had been in Vietnam for 4 years, so it was people were being brought in. There was no A team for 9 Squadron. It was a question of rotating the force, keeping the proficiency levels up, and then the work was largely the basis of it was just to keep up the scheduled maintenance too. And that was just the nitty-gritty of day-to-day work in the hangar, keeping aircraft serviceable. And it was important to keep in balance the long-term asset preservation of the aircraft and also meet the sort of daily mission generation that you required. Because if one got out of kilter with the other, simple things like keeping a stagger were absolutely essential. Otherwise, the balance of the crew got out of kilter. The aircraft were not ready for the task that you wanted, and you had to make some pretty quick decisions then to keep that balance going.
So it was sort of the whole unit was under a little bit of demand the whole time.
Well, my overriding impression of that 12 months was just the unrelenting intensity of maintenance effort, the intensity of requirement for operations. Of course, it just didn't go away. It was day after day, week after week, and you just had to keep on top of it from a planning viewpoint and then trust your maintenance crew. I mean, I had so much respect for a warrant officer who ran the hangar, looked after that part of it for me, and one was able to make the decisions that you had to balance the long term with the short term.
How did the RAAF of the 60s support you in doing your job up there, or not?
I thought the RAAF of the 60s, and I make the point it was a pretty busy RAAF of the 60s at that time. I mean, Vietnam had 3 squadrons there. There was still a commitment to Butterworth. So I think the figures are around that period of the time Air Force had something like 45% of its operational force committed overseas, and we were just one squadron working our backsides off in Vietnam, and it really reflected very favourably on the way the Air Force was organised generally and was able to bring the people to the job. Now, when I came back from Vietnam, the AMTS of the day, he called me to his office and he said, I want you to write me a few words about what Vietnam was like from your perspective. And the words that I went back to him with were to say that, in my humble opinion, I felt that the experience I had really validated the Air Force structure, its organisation, its training profiles, regimes, both air and ground crew of that era. The interesting thing, of course, is that in my next 20 years of experience in the Air Force, most of that was changed.
Good. So that was a plus at least. Then how about the Huey itself? How that is a platform in a very stressful environment, very high demand environment.
Well, I reckon the Huey did well there. I mean, the Iroquois is basically a mechanical contrivance. It has a lot of rotating components, exposed shafting, exposed bearings, and in the operating environment of the day, it worked hard and it was pressured, but in general, it came through pretty well, and most of it needed a lot of maintenance. I have to say that, and a lot of that maintenance had to do with the operational environment. I mean, the aircraft operated down on the ground amongst the weeds of the battlefield, so it got dirty. It was working in hot environment or dusty or wet, and a lot of the maintenance work was simply cleaning the thing out, lubricating it, and keeping it going. So in general, I thought the Huey performed pretty well. Now, one might say, well, it was a very basic aircraft of the helicopter era. No auto hovering ability, fairly limited crashworthiness, fairly limited. Well, the maintainability was fairly good. At the end of the day, a helicopter's full of a lot of air anyway. So from a battle damage point of view, we seemed to be fairly lucky at times.
Having been overseas myself in that sense, in a remote area, call it remote from all the infrastructure you've got in Australia anyway. How did the support environment? What was it like, and who provided it?
Well, the support was really provided locally. First of all, I should say, 9 Squadron was an independent squadron, so we were on our own. You became pretty isolated, and you had to do what you had to do within your own initiative. The U.S. Army provided the 3 staples of aviation support: fuel, ammunition, and spares. And the spares, there was a twofold approach, I suppose. The spares, the quantity of spares was quite outstanding. We were pretty close at Vung Tau to Long Bin and the warehouses there, and our troops became very adept at being able to obtain spares one way or the other. If the supply system didn't work, then a slab of VB certainly would work, and that was often the case. And that was pretty important. Now, the other point about it is that the quality of the spares was something else. The standard was often very inadequate, and I mean that could have drastic consequences if in the middle of the night you wanted an engine change or a blade change or something, and you opened up the container and found it half full of water and this white stuff all over the aluminium, then that sets you back for a day and a night at least. Apart from that, the support from the domestic support was provided, of course, by Air Force, and I thought that was very good. We lived on a US Army base on an airfield. the hangarage that we had was really quite superb. That had been built several years earlier by Airfield Construction Squadron, and that allowed 24-hour day operation. Probably useful to say at this point that there had been a little bit of controversy about where the squadron should be located when it went to Vietnam. Should it be at Nui Dat or at Vung Tau? Now, of course, the Army, well, they wanted us to live next to them under canvas. The fact is that at Vung Tau, security was pretty good, and also we had good hangarage, and we could work fairly safely through the night, 24 hours if you had to. You just couldn't have done that at Nui Dat. So from a location viewpoint, I thought it was excellent, and that's one of the lessons that we should tuck away for us when we ever think about deploying forces, to make sure that the location of maintenance is a sensible approach. I should also say, sorry, we shared that hangar with 35 squadrons, so we had one half of it, and the Caribous were in the other half. The revetments, of course, were. I inherited the aircraft revetments. I think they were built several years earlier by Squadron Labour, and they were good.
When you talk about the environment being quite punishing in some ways on the aircraft, how did that affect the amount of maintenance effort that's required to keep them in the air?
Yes, it had a big impact, and it's probably just worthwhile to look at the effect of that. Probably the most profound impact of the environment, the heat, the dust, the water, rains, was on engine performance. And an interesting statistic is that over the 5 years that the squadron was in Vietnam, only one engine fulfilled its full scheduled overhaul life. Every other engine would have came out from generally from loss of power or engine or fuel leaks, oil leaks. So engine changes were a constant challenge for us. And of course, they produced test flights and such. I mentioned the cleaning that went on with the aircraft. Some of that was produced by the environment, dust and dirt and such, and some simply by the operating conditions, where the aircraft would get, unfortunately, very dirty, filled with residue, be it human residue or battle residue, and it was pretty frequent for an aircraft to call for on return to base, to call for a water tanker to be hosed out and cleaned out. That was okay from that point of view, but of course then the helicopter floor panels had to be lifted, and that wasn't a very pleasant experience either for the guy who had to do that. In reality, the operating environment had an enormous impact on maintenance. And the other interesting statistic is that, well, two stats really, is that the squadron maintenance effort was about double that for a peacetime squadron in Australia. Double. It's an interesting statistic that also, from a lessons learned viewpoint, we should stick away quietly in the background. In fact, I want to follow that up later, because it really is quite important. And it had a really large impact. The other impact was that the servicing periods were reduced by half. So we serviced the aircraft at twice the interval as we did in Australia. And that produced a requirement for twice the maintenance effort that was in terms of man hours. Now, just to take that a little further, though, in the 80s and perhaps the 90s, there was a move to try to reduce the footprint of squadrons that you took away on deployment, on active service. And I recall quite senior Air Force engineers saying, oh, well, when we go away on in active service, then we can reduce maintenance standards and we can reduce the people that are needed. And I became very excited when I heard that, because the experience I had was that it was wrong by about a factor of 2. So, and I found the Air Force at large at that time, not sure they really wanted to hear that, or I often sometimes feel that Air Force has trouble learning lessons. And that worried me a bit. In fact, the other while we're on that point, also in later years, one of the really valuable things about the workforce that I had is that it was rotated on a you spent your 12 months there, but it was a continuous form of rotation. And of course, the people that came into that had to come from somewhere, and they came from what I called a force that was in reserve. And that force in reserve was in the aircraft depots that we had at the time, in the maintenance squadrons that we had at the time. And those people that came out of those units were very skilled. I mean, they had depot level maintenance experience. And for example, for engines, we had an engine shop, and it wasn't unusual at all to have to take the half a compressor casing off and clean the blades, perhaps replace a blade or two. And the people that were good at that were people that had spent time in aircraft depots. So I became pretty excited towards the end of my career when I found that we were going to dissolve our aircraft depots and our maintenance squadrons, because one, it was going to reduce the quality and standard of people coming available to go into our deployed squadrons, and 2, there were numbers there that would later cause problems.
Did you have any extra people on establishment? Did they provide you with extra people because of the extra maintenance load, or did they expect you to handle that?
Oh no, we had a good establishment. The manpower quantity was quite good, quite good. And I should say that because we were an independent squadron, we were also in a position where we had metal workers, metal machinists, welders, people perhaps that you wouldn't expect to see in a flying squadron in peacetime. So those guys were invaluable. I mean, I could think of a number of times when things were difficult. We were looking for parts that we couldn't get out of the spare system or rob from the boneyards in Long Bin, where we would ask a metal machinist to have to machine up a part for us.
So what were the boneyards?
Our boneyard was just where all the wrecks were. And,
Yes, to get to the wreckers.
That's right. These were places that you went and picked the best one that you could out, one that wasn't heat damaged, and brought it back and fitted it. I've got to say that the other important thing is that the standard of maintenance had to be kept up. I mean, you can't afford well, you can't afford it any time with aircraft,
Yeah.
but certainly not on active service. You can't afford to reduce standards.
Yeah.
And that's another thing where people get some strange ideas. I mean, people will say, well, we want to reduce the numbers, then we'll reduce standards. Or to get an aircraft home or to do something, you can do some sort of very irrational.
Yeah.
That's not the time to be doing those sorts of things at all.
We lost two aircraft in mid-1970 before you arrived a few months later, but we still maintain the same requirement for online aircraft. And I forget what the duration of that shortfall was. When you were there, did you also face that same dilemma?
Yes, yes, we lost two aircraft in my time there. So the inventory of aircraft went from 16 down to 15, and then at one stage for several months we had 14. Still had to meet your online requirement. Still had to have, well, really, when we say 3 gunships, we always needed one in spare, so it was four gunships really. So no, there was no reduction in online, and I'm not sure that we ever really missed. I mean, the fact is that, as you know, Rags, the planning for allocation of aircraft was that there was a lower priority for let's say 6 or 7 down to the ninth slick. So there were times when you might have had an aircraft in the hangar, but were able to meet the requirement when it had to be brought online. That often happened also for scheduled servicing. Now, I mean, there were a few times when we were able to pull a sea servicing out, which raises an interesting point. We had a sea servicing in the regime of the maintenance for the Iroquois at the time, and a D service. The sea servicing in Australia took about 3-4 weeks to do. In Vietnam, a sea servicing was done in a day. That was a plan. It had to go in a day, and every day there was a sea servicing. Just had to be, and it had to come out one way or the other. Came out at 5 o'clock or it came out at midnight. It had to come out. The D service came up about twice a year for each aircraft, and that took a week. Now, 5 Squadron in my time in peace, a D service might take you 5 weeks. So, I mean, part of that was due to troops just being very experienced, also understood the task at hand. They knew what the job was, nowhere else for them to go, so they worked their backsides off and got the job done.
Mac, Bob Redman again. The gunships were always heavy and operating almost full power most of the time, and the slicks varied a lot more. Did you notice any difference in the wear and tear on the gunship frames and engines versus the slicks?
Well, certainly on the engines, the gunship engine tended to have its power problems. But the other point, of course, is that the gunship also varied between a gunship configuration and a slick variation. So they spent a bit of time in the slick configuration, but certainly the engine was for the gunship was it was a hard life for them. It really was. Yeah. Otherwise, there wasn't really much difference. I mean, I guess in a sense, for the no, there really wasn't much difference in damage for the gunship, other than for the engine.
Yeah, and the airframe was obviously at a bit more strain than the slick, particularly on the turn off the weapons run. And
yes, what the other impact on gunships was on the tail boom and the tail boom attachment area, because of course with high power settings, then the tail boom was working fairly hard. So we would normally keep a pretty close eye on on the tail boom and the tail boom attachments.
Okay, and then the slicks, although they weren't using the high power as often and for the duration of the gunships, they're certainly in the combat assaults and those sort of things. It was far more dusty, and they were operating almost instrument conditions, but in the dirt. So, what about the filtering and so on, or the effect of that?
Yes, yes. There was a lot of compressor cleaning of engines going on. Filters needed to be cleaned really thoroughly, and that was just part of the business of keeping the aircraft clean. Simple things like greasing bearings in the control system, flight control system. The environment had a huge impact on the aircraft, and the workload of the people.
Yep, and my experience was that just about everything in the aircraft was serviceable. Very rarely did we have any equipment that wasn't serviceable in our aircraft across the whole fleet, which I thought was a big difference to what I experienced elsewhere.
It's an interesting observation, Rags, because my view was that it's a bit like the standard business for an aircraft on active service. You just can't afford to have aircraft that weren't serviceable. Now, in the case of configuration, you well know that the aircraft was, and the Slick particularly, was a utility aircraft. I mean, and on a given day, it could be doing a dust off, then a troop movement, or moving an artillery piece with external loads. So you couldn't, on a utility aircraft, afford to carry an unserviceability. I mean, you just couldn't release an aircraft and say, well, today we haven't got a hoist for bad luck. I mean, you just had to have, and there were very, very few times when we would have a CFU for a carried forward unserviceability for an aircraft. I mean, I can think of, I did do it one day at Nui, I suppose, when 4 or 5 aircraft came in, all with some form of battle damage. One had a bullet hole through the main rotor. I was able to turn that around and release it for flight for the rest of that day. Another one had a tail boom attachment fitting severed, so there's no way we could fly that. Certainly not in gunship configuration. And on that particular day, a really extraordinary event. We changed a gunship tail numbers for a gunship at Nui. That was an extraordinary effort to change an aircraft completely in configuration from Slick to gunship. And then the Slick was the Slick that had then been created was then uplifted by Chinook back to Nui Dat. And I guess that leads to recovery of aircraft. And Rags, you would well know that aircrew, when they had trouble with an aircraft, and be it a forced situation or a US that had come up in flight, aircrew were very adept at getting the aircraft back to a reasonably safe area to work on. And our approach was, well, you've certainly had to get the aircraft before nightfall out of a remote area. Get it back to a fire support base, probably not preferable, hard for us to work on it there. Get it back to Nui Data, and the really prime priority was to get it back to Vung Tau. Now, if it couldn't be flown back, we couldn't make it serviceable, and that happened occasionally. Then you got ops to call up a Chinook and get it moved that way. Wasn't preferable. In those days, there was an A model Chinook flying, but with US Army, and they had a bit of a tendency to call Mayday with hydraulic leaks, and the first of course move was to drop their external load. That didn't happen to us. We were lucky.
So just quickly for information, how was the gunship configured? So when you changed it back to a slick or changed a slick into a gunship, what was the work we required, just generally speaking?
Well, generally speaking, it was to fit the mounts for the miniguns at the front, and then the rocket launchers on the side. So it was that's all that was needed. It was just hard work to get it done if you weren't undercover particularly.
So was did the armourers have a lot of work in regard to maintaining guns and
They had an enormous amount of work, and another area, another lesson learned. Just make sure you understand what wears out, what needs maintenance when you're deployed on active service. I mean, in case of armament, each aircraft came back with two M60 side guns that needed to be cleaned. The four gunships would always have weapons that had been fired, so there's 8 miniguns that needed to be cleaned that night. Really hard, dirty work. I mean, I started life as an armament fitter, as an apprentice, and I understand what those guys were going through. I mean, the heart and soul of that squadron, to a large extent, was armament fitters. I had two excellent armament officers, Norm Russell and a really clever fellow called John Payne, and he was the man that changed the configuration of gunships, the ammunition storage and feed arrangement quite dramatically, and it allowed us to be able to store, preload our gunship storage between sorties. And that was a great improvement. It also got a big improvement in stoppages.
you could say the troops were quite innovative in looking at maintenance work and working out maybe how to be more efficient or more effective.
Yes, they were, and they was. I mean, it was the best expression of teamwork that I ever enjoyed in my 40 years of Air Force. The guys were. It was just a wonderful degree of what I call natural morale. I never had a disciplinary problem. The guys knew what their job was. They knew what the task was. They knew what the priorities were, and just got on with it. It was. You don't often see it, but it was a seamless operation, and that involved the cooperation with aircrew as well. I mean, very often 5 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock at night, we want a test flight, and never had difficulty getting somebody to fly.
I believe you had hot refueling in Vietnam. Was that a difficult issue when it was first introduced?
I think it was, and you need to talk to Mick Axel about that. He knows the background to it much better than I do. I just enjoyed the fact that when I got there, hot refueling was in place.
Okay.
Matt, Bob Redman again.
Mm.
When did I think the armourers were up at Nui Dat right from the time we introduced gunships, but when did we also put other fitters up there as a forward maintenance?
Yes, not till about halfway through my tour, somewhere around April 71, I would have thought, which raises an interesting point. These guys also, together with the rearm people, the armament fitters, lived under canvas at Nui Dat. So they had their fair share of interesting times at Nui Dat as well.
Along with the dust-off crews.
Along with the dust-off crews, certainly so, yes.
What is a dust-off?
Medevac.
Medevac, okay. We got to make sure that our audience can understand some of it.
Absolutely.
So the other thing is, quite often on these sorts of deployments, which I experienced in my life, there were humorous episodes. Can you remember anything that was quite humorous and gave everybody a little bit of a laugh or a bit of a nod of the head about what happened?
Oh, snakes in aircraft.
snakes.
People finding a snake in the environs of an Iroquois.
Did they get the snakes mainly on the ground? Did the snakes ever get airborne?
Yes.
Oh, they must have been. They came into the hangar, so they only got there one way. But it was up the hell hole of the aircraft, so it was. And the Vietnamese labourer that we had said it was quite delicious.
Did anyone have any close calls with a snake?
One was in the aircraft called around the cyclic as the aircraft was returning to Vung Tau from Nui Dat, and the left-hand pilot started unstrapping and easing his way out of the seat. They found that. And the other was Graham Christian doing a pre-flight at Vung Tau before going to Nui Dat, and looked in through the engine inspection. One of the engine inspection panels, there was a snake on the engine deck, and I think that was the one that ended up for morning tea.
Quite a nice warm place for him.
I have some notes here about someone putting down with a hydraulic failure in the village. I have some notes here about how they got distracted.
Yes. Robin Klitcher had lost hydraulics, so he made a running landing in fairly close to a village, and it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So the call comes, got this aircraft, no hydraulics, need to get it out. Well, I mean, hydraulics pretty important part of the aircraft. So we got some people together, and what do you take? Oh well, we'll try an irreversible valve. We'll try tail rotor servo or main rotor servo, and hope for the best. And when we got there and checked it out, it was an irreversible valve. So the valve was changed fairly quickly, and we're ready to depart. We needed to get out of there before nightfall, and I couldn't find any troops. They were distracted, and they were distracted because this comely young thing was bathing in the big communal bath in the village. So, hey guys, we've got to get out of here. We must get home.
Dear.
The other interesting time I had was, I mean, I've got to say that, and it should be said really, that I had the last 12 months of the squadron in Vietnam, and a year before that, before I arrived, Nixon had said, well, US is getting out of Vietnam, and one might have thought that life would have eased a little bit in terms of activity. In my judgment, and that, in fact, that of Bruce Martin, who I got to know very well, was that wasn't the case. In fact, activity got far more involved in that last 12 months. And it's perhaps interesting, sadly, to note that we lost our air crew in that period. But it led to changes in how we went about things, and the activity levels increased, and we just seemed to have more aircraft with battle damage. We had more aircraft that went down outside the wire, and then towards the end of that period, somewhere about August, I guess it was. The VC and the NVA, of course, they knew what was happening. They knew the US war was ending, so they were trying to do their darndest to establish themselves in country when the time came to do so. And there was a stage there when the task force needed to take some fairly drastic action to make sure that the Nui Dat area was secure. And to do that, they placed some forces quite further out from Nui Dat than normally, and the task force commander asked CO of 9 Squadron to work further further north than we had normally worked. And in turn, the CO came to me and said, well, we need to do some rearming and, well, no, not so much rearming, but refueling further north, which we did. So we established in a very isolated area, a drum refueling capability, and spent all day refueling drums. Now, during the course of that, Pete Mahood, the CO, came in with an aircraft, and he motioned me over to it, sort of pointed at the panel, at the cockpit panel, and I could see the warning lights glaring brightly, and the element showed a hydraulic failure. And we were miles and miles from Nui Dat. We were miles and miles further from Bung Tau. And what do you do in those circumstances? As it turned out, I had a quick think on the run, and fluid levels were okay. Didn't seem to be any leaks anywhere. So maybe, just maybe, it's a warning problem. So I got a spanner, walked down the back of the aircraft, unbuttoned and exposed the pressure transmitter switch, gave it a very good whack with the spanner, looked up the front, and Mahood's got his hands out the side, thumbs up, lights out, and the war went on. Luck can be a fortune. My goodness me. If we hadn't have done that, I'm not sure how we would have got the aircraft home, other than to ask some kind pilot to try to fly the thing back without hydraulics.
So, but it wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been an engineer tapping it, though, would it? It had to be the engineer.
No, it was a very calibrated whack.
That's what I mean. It only be calibrated by an engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
So, just to get some reflections from you, were there lessons learned in Vietnam that were taken forward or weren't taken forward? Were there lessons that you thought were highly important that were picked up on for future? Yeah. Or anything you thought was highly important that didn't get picked up on?
Well, sorry, probably didn't get picked up on. I've mentioned that the business of I had particular regard for the skills of our workforce, and those particularly who brought depot level maintenance experience. And of course, by the time I retired, I closed down Logistics Command, which wasn't a very comfortable experience for me, because in my mind, as you recall, we reduced from 24,000 Air Force numbers to something around 11 or 12, and all of those people went out from our maintenance squadrons and our aircraft depots together with our base organisations. And I think that weakened the Air Force. I really do. The fact that we would not have that pool of people to draw from to fill in rotational forces was one aspect, and the second was we would lose the experience levels of those. My arguments along those lines just didn't seem to carry weight. Perhaps people remember at the time also that was the Defence Reform Program. There was just a consistent heavy wave of enthusiasm to change, must change at all costs, and we did change. So I thought that was sad.
Anything else come to mind?
Oh, well, I think some engineers probably need to understand that active service isn't a time when you make judgment or drastic changes to servicing standards. We should always understand that if we take aircraft away on deployment into active service, and probably also not so much in active service, you can expect maintenance workloads to go up, not reduce, and in fact, probably very dangerous to reduce them, as you can't pay Peter can't pay Paul all the time. The world catches up with you at some stage. And those to me are the major lessons. I mean,
Okay.
the other thing, and you talked about hot refueling. That was a difficult thing to come to grips with, but it just exhibited that people in staff positions have got to listen to what's happening at the active level, and it seemed to me at times that the Air Force had difficulty doing that. There was, and Rags might remember, towards the end of the tour in '71, Support Command got very, very interested in hydraulics and the quality of our hydraulic systems. And strangely, they insisted on running this program to try to clean up our hydraulics. And their approach by that was simply to run the hydraulic system on the ground for, seemed to me, almost 12 or so hours at a day. And that came to us on an STI. And my response to that was, we're not going to do that. We just can't afford to do that. And we won't do it until somebody gives me and assures me I've got a hydraulic rig to be able to do it. It was just very difficult to get people to understand that you really were in a war, and you needed to. People needed to understand that.
Mm.
So, I mean, I think the lesson is that people in staff appointments who have looking after standards and such, and procedures and programs and rules and such. Another one came up towards the end of our time where the task force commander said to the CEO of 9 Squadron, we need to, we've got some really bad mosquito contamination here at Nui Dat. Can you do some spraying for us? Well, yes, sir, we can do some spraying. So CEO says to Senjo, try and find yourself some spraying units and do some tests and see whether we can't spray mosquito spray. Now, we got that job done, and the pilots got it done. And you just imagine doors open all the time, flying low level over Nui Dat, spraying this in bloody awful insect repellent. When you come back, you flying overalls are just drenched with fluid. We probably should have been wiser about the requirement, actually.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Bob?
Yeah, Mac, the training that you went through and the apprentice scheme in the late 50s, early 60s seemed to have served the Air Force really well. But what's the situation now where we're mostly committed to contractor maintenance and because of the technology? What's your feelings about that, or any predictions you've got?
I have some pretty strong feelings about it, actually, but and I guess it gets back to, we were talking before there about lessons learned, and the apprentice, and whether we had learned lessons or we hadn't learned lessons. Well, let's think about that. In late 80s, we conducted engineers did this. They conducted a review of the trade restructure. They reduced totally, took away the armament fitter mustering. Now, do you think how I felt about that? I'd trained as an armament fitter. I've been in Vietnam with and seen what was needed from armament fitters. And this Air Force took armoured fitters out of being. They've now been restored, thankfully. But sometimes we do things not very sensible. We also ceased the apprentice scheme in the late 80s, and for reasonable reasons. And there were reasonable reasons why the trade structure had to be reviewed. I mean, both of you would understand in the Iroquois world, we had flight fitters A and B for ages, where we amalgamated trades, and that was the precursor to the trade restructure, and worked very well. Worked very well for F-18s particularly, so that was good cause. But why you would want to take out of your structure the ability to have armoured fitters was just lost on me. And people, when you talk to them and didn't understand what you were saying, there just seemed to be a lack of understanding of whether people with active service experience should in fact ever be listened to. It's an interesting question. That's why I said earlier in the piece, I'm not sure that Air Force is very good at learning lessons.